Welcome to yet another episode of Shortcast Over Coffee. Today, my guest is Lakshmi Sharath. Lakshmi is a well known traveler and writer who has been to 50 countries and counting. She is an inspiration for solo women travelers and motivates them to explore the world on their own. She is also the recipient of India's Best Travel Blog Award in the year 2008. She shares tips, itineraries, and stories from her trips on her blog at lakshmisharath.com. She is also a brilliant travel writer and was a columnist for the Hindu Metro Plus. This is part 1 of a 2-part episode with Lakshmi. In this episode, we talk about her early career in the media and how her penchant for travel started. Part 2 of this episode will be on her travel to Japan, especially the city of Kyoto, and meeting with Roger Federer. Let's now get into the conversation. Hi, Lakshmi. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me over. I'm looking forward to this session.
Cool. You're quite a veteran in the travel blogging world, having started your blog in 2005, and we'll get to that very soon. But you almost had 15 years of experience in the media world too. Tell me a bit more about that, your background and education.
I'm a mass comm student and I studied in Bombay. I did my mass comm way back in the 90s. So I say that I'm somebody who was in the cusp of the analog and the digital era because when I studied mass comm, ironically, uh, internet still hadn't come to India. There were no mobile phones in India. We were pretty much living in the analog era. Even photography was taught to us with, TPs and films and the good old analog world, which seems so far away. So I started in that analog era, and I used to be a bit of a writer even during my college days. We used to, a friend and I virtually ran a neighborhood newspaper together, and a neighborhood newspapers were completely something very, very, people hadn't heard of it. This was in Chennai, and I grew up in Chennai. So we went during my college days in Chennai. A friend and I, we used to do this neighborhood newspaper. We used to, after college, go and work. And I used to do a lot of writing. I used to write for a lot of city-based tabloids and a lot of little magazines. And I always enjoyed writing even when I was in college. So I wanted to obviously, get into journalism or mass comm. And then, it was only in Bombay that some of the best colleges were at that point of time. Although I did try with a few in Chennai and Bangalore, but I mean, glad I got into Bombay because it gave me my entire media life of 15 years, out of which 5 full years were in Bombay, where I was based in Bombay. So I was like 21 when I landed in Bombay, and I got into the whole television world at that time. And TV was more of not what it is like today. It was not about reality shows, and it was not about all these talk shows. It was more a lot of feature program, more of lifestyle program, a lot of content, a lot of focus was on stories which are more lifestyle, people, art, travel, and that's where I think I got my entire interest in travel also because I started traveling a lot even before that. In fact, I'd done my first international trip in my college days when, and like I said, and those were days when internet or mobile phones had still not come to India. And but I'll come to that later. But I think but overall, that's where my love of travel started. And when I started my career in media, digital suddenly became a thing, 4 or 5 years later. The first digital boom started around 2000, and then it quickly rose and then it quickly flopped. And then a lot of people lost their jobs. And then again, I went into broadcast where I went into radio and I was setting up radio stations across. And by then, I had made this transition from a content communication kind of a role to a business head kind of a role, operations kind of a role. I was setting up radio stations. I was getting into the nitty-gritties of media. I was getting into the business of media to some extent. And it was great. I mean, I loved my media career. I still love it. But I just felt at some point of time that I was just stuck to the cabin. I mean, no matter how much of opportunities I was getting, it was still within the media environment. It was still within the corporate life. You're just moving from one level to another level. But end of the day, I felt I wasn't evolving. as a person. I wasn't growing because I was giving almost 20 hours to my job, and somewhere I felt that I wanted more out of life. So I decided to just step back and take a sabbatical. And then when I took a sabbatical, I went into rural Karnataka and I went into exploring a lot of little villages. I went into the whole Hoysala country, the whole Malnad region. I traveled to almost 20, 30 Hoysala temples. I've saw them. Some of the some of the temples I opened the doors myself, and some I traveled with my cousin. And we discovered ruins in the middle of nowhere. We would suddenly walk into a place and it would just burst into a scenery with sunflower fields. We would walk into someone's home and they would give us coffee, and we would be talking to someone and they would just invite us over. I mean, it was nice, just so different from the usual boardroom and corporate life and world that I had been in. And I guess somewhere in me, I always wanted to kind of slow down because 15 years of my career, both in Bombay and Bangalore, and in different aspects of media, had been pretty much overwhelming, and I felt that I needed a break, and look at life in a very different perspective. And I think that's what travel was to me, because travel always started with not like most travelers do, which is just to experience a destination or just do a destination, as they say, or look at the sights and sounds. It was more for me to do with my own experience, my own growth, my own journey. And of course, every destination, the journey becomes the destination in most cases.
Did your career in the media coincide with the whole proliferation of or start of proliferation of cable channels in India? Or was it before that? Was it only DD?
No, no, no. We were pretty much the cable boom had started, and all the Star and MTV and all of that had already started. It was not that old a fossil, I would think. It's just that the digital era had not yet come, and it was a height of TV. So, but it was not the news TV. It was more like we had a lot of lifestyle shows. I was working on this show called the Amul India Show, which was sponsored by Amul, and it used to be a lot of panache and a lot of I mean, there was Bollywood, but there was also a lot of art and theater and lifestyle. And it was like what lifestyle publications were all about. And I started as a correspondent and went on to a producer of the show. But we would do a lot of trend stories. We would also do a lot of human interest stories. We would also talk to a lot of few people. And we would also cover topics which are not just about lifestyle or page three kind of stuff. Uh, but it gave me like a great grounding. And then we would cover, like I've covered politics for MTV. I've done shows with MTV kind of style of covering, talking to politicians and following them on the election trail. And then I've also gone and done business interviews and I've gone and interviewed, like, say, Infosys and various CEOs of various companies, both IT and non-IT. We used to talk about real estate. So, it gave me an overall perspective to a lot of, because it's so much was packed into that 4 5 years that I was in TV. And I was in content. And at that time, the company that I was working at was called TV18, which is now CNBC. But at that time, TV18 was more like a software. We would create content. We call themselves a software provider, but software not in the IT sense, but in the sense we would create content for various channels. So business, lifestyle, entertainment, page three, road show. In fact, I started with a road show on cars and bikes, and the soft stories also. So there was a overall a very interesting mix, and I got a very good introduction. And plus, it was Bombay, and all that jazz about being in Bombay. And so it was a great experience. And internet or digital had just started coming in. Nobody even knew. I mean, we just started understanding what an email was like, and we would rarely go and check Google or Wi-Fi, and all these were like not at all still in our vocabulary, so as to speak. I think emails was the only one thing that we knew, and of course, mobile phones slowly started coming in. And yeah, but so, and then the first digital boom, I think websites and all that started in about 2000, just at the cusp of, 2099, 2000. That's when a lot of people joined website, I mean, online. Even I joined a company called Lycos Asia, which was a Singapore based company, and they had like 14 portals across Asia. But then September 11th happened, and they just decided to pull out of Asia, except for Singapore. There's all the offices were closed. So a lot of us got laid off, and I've also had that experience of getting laid off, and way back. So I think it's no big deal, and then that was the first .com. People started understanding that it was just the boom and the bust happened very quickly, and then I went back to traditional media, but this time into radio, and I've joined two radio stations. It was Mirchi. I was the programming head of it in Chennai, and then I joined Big FM, where we moved, like I said, from content creation into being a business head, and then setting up radio stations. And I took over the responsibility of South, because that's where I was kind of oriented. So I became like the South head, and we launched a lot of radio stations. And so getting to understand audiences, getting to understand their preferences, getting to understand the pulse of the market, all that was something which was something I learned in media itself.
During your work, did you get to travel a lot?
Oh, yes. So during my TV days, got a lot of traveling to be done. And we used to do a lot of shoots in and around Bombay. We used to go to small towns, we used to go to a lot of little places. And I got to go do my international shoots as well. And during radio, of course, I started setting up radio stations across South India. So every time I would go for a business meeting, and then I would just go around and look for places and, things like that, and look at small little getaways and things like that. While doing my TV assignments, I would travel around Bombay initially, and we would go into nooks, we would go into places around, sometimes outskirts of the cities, to be, into beaches. And those days, half of these places were still like really remote villages. And we would go to Pune, Nasik, places around in Maharashtra. But I've also done a lot of international, couple of international assignments came. I did my first travel. We had a travel show, and I did a first travel show in Singapore, where I actually on the go had to edit about or create 13 stories. We, of course, had a host who would be there, but then I used to do the scripting and the direction of it. And we had another correspondent helping me out, and then another, the camera crew and all. And we would like go all around Singapore shooting. And again, you must appreciate that this was more than 25 years ago. So people are not used to, I mean, today everybody's carrying mics and cameras and, ravaging every destination. But those days it was still novel to do that. But it was quite an experience, because we would script on the go, we would write up stories on the go, and we would get, research. And we didn't have like internet and things so much. It's not like I had a mobile phone and I could just Google stuff. So we had to collect a lot of information also locally. We had a guide, and we would talk to a lot of locals and pick out a lot of information and put it all into a script format, or a lot of it on the go. So we'd had a lot of fun doing all of that, because it was interesting and it was different. And in my TV days, no one day was the same. I mean, like one day would be shooting Bollywood, the next day would be shooting something in travel, one day would be talking to we'd cover a deep story on HIV positive, some other day would be talking about theater, some day would do a page 3. So, every day would be different. Some days would do business. And then I moved to Bangalore to head the bureau. And then in Bangalore, we cover a lot of offbeat destinations, resorts close by. Bangalore had a lot of these undiscovered places at that time. A lot of people still were not traveling like the way we're traveling here. Again, I'm talking about something which was more than, almost 25 years ago. So a lot of it was new. Even fashion shows were new, relatively speaking. Coffee was new. So a lot of lifestyle changes were happening in Bangalore. But Bangalore itself was on the cusp of change at that point of time. So we would cover a lot of that for television. And I would also write at that time. So I think that kind of travel was always there. So, exploring nooks and corners of places and cities and towns, and going into offbeat destinations. And radio, of course, was a different kind of travel, where when I was setting up radio stations, I would go look for an office space or go to a meeting, and then I would get like a break, and I would just go in to see some offbeat temple or a fort, or walk into some meadows somewhere, or into a village and just sit and have coffee or chai with the locals and talk to them, or into some bustling market. So for me, travel was never about just destinations. It had to be exotic. It's just about the experience of just meeting people and imbibing the culture of a place, and just because I always believe that people make places, and talking to people was enough to kind of experience a destination sometimes.
Yeah, you bring an interesting point where you say in media no 2 days are alike, right? I've talked to people who work in the film industry and the media, and this is one thing that they say in common is that they just love that whole impromptuness and the whole process of making a content, and that really drives them more
To be
than.
honest, I miss that. I really miss that, especially in this Instagram days where everything is so structured and so formatted. And I mean, they tell you that you can experiment, but it is all within a format and a structure given to you. Okay, this will go viral and this won't go viral. And, you know, so I think the whole fun of media was the whole unpredictable world it was in. Like every day was a high. It was, I mean, for me, especially the first 5 years of my media career when I was in Bombay, was one of the most, what do I use the word, most overwhelming and most challenging in a way, because I was also in my early 20s, and I was navigating a new city. We were also moving from the analog to digital era. We were also like kind of, and we didn't know it at that time, but it was also about, like I said, the whole one, like I said, every day was a new experience. Like one day I'm talking to some real estate mogul, the next day I'm doing a page 3 art exhibition, and the third day I'm interviewing a socialite like Shobha. Fourth day I'm covering a Bollywood event. It's such a uh, Bombay itself is such a maximum city that it pushes you. And when you are in a world where everything is just happening now, and it's happening right now, and it's not even news. I mean, you can imagine how news would be. News would be even more like, have the pulse of the market thing would be so fast. But here, lifestyle itself was so much fun. And you would never know where you're going, because you're also a rookie and you're a small little trainee correspondent. You have no clue where you're going tomorrow, what your assignments are going to be, where you're going to land up. And suddenly, one day, my boss called and told me that let's do a human interest story, and let's cover, people who are, HIV positive, and get them to tell their stories. And I'm like, nobody's going to tell their stories. I mean, we're talking about late 90s. I mean, no one's going to come on camera and start talking about. She was like, no, no, you should give it a try. And that was quite an experience. First of all, meeting people who are HIV was such a taboo subject at that point of time. Meeting them, going to all these places, sometimes I would get a lot of sneers and jibes, but you take it all in your stride. I mean, I don't know if I'm that thick skinned now, but those days it just didn't matter. You just want to move on with get your things done. And also, it's another thing is, it's not just about a story. End of the day, you it makes you more sensitive. It makes you more aware of a lot of things. It teaches you how to deal with people. You can't just walk up and put a mic in someone's face and say, Ajay, you're HIV sensitive, tell me your story. You can't do that. You have to sit and talk to them, find out if they're comfortable, find out if they're okay. We would do a lot of videos where we would blur their faces. Then itself, we would get their voice recordings. We would take their shadows. We would take a lot of cutaways. We would do it more like a storytelling process, rather than just put someone's thrust their mic on just for sensationalism. But to get them to even agree to that was a lot of talk to them
Convince
about
them,
trust.
right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you have to listen to their story, because they need to be willing to talk. They need to be willing to, be comfortable coming on camera, and they have to feel that it's not for a story they're doing, but to create awareness. Because at the end of the day, we were also not doing it because we are not some commercials thing that we were just doing it to get some. We wanted people to say that it was all right. Even a channel like even lifestyle channels were saying it's fine, and there are people who are fighting battles and taboos, and they are able to move on with life. And it was not an easy thing to say. And these are very gray areas. We're talking about people's lives. like I said, it's not just another story that that you can just go and thrust someone's mic. So I learned a lot of sense. I learned how to be sensitive, how to be open to criticism, how to be open to, I mean, and also you feel how privileged you are, because it's not about going out there, because you're talking about someone's life here. So a lot of these things kind of makes you a very different person at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Coming back to traveling, you just decided one fine day that, okay, now I'm going to start exploring the world? Or
No, actually, I
how did
just
your
decided.
family react to it?
Okay, so I was working 22 hours non-stop, and during in when I was between Mirchi and Big FM itself, I started my blogging. It was in 2005, and I was still with Mirchi, and I started my blog at that time, because I had I had this extreme curiosity about any new platform at that point of time. I don't think I'm like that now. I'm like, oh, not another platform. And that's my reaction at this point of time. But those days, I would always experiment with anything that used to come in. And so when I started blogging, I first started actually at a personal blog way back in 2004, and it was more like a diary, but it was also not so much just a personal diary where I'm writing like a journal, but it used to be a little bit of my observations, or I would mostly to practice my writing and practice my like I would just go for a walk and write my observations, or I would talk about an experience that was overwhelming, or a particular topic that mattered a lot to me. So these it was a place for me to uh just you know kind of I mean, it was a kind of place for me to also express myself, but at the same time also keep in touch with my writing. um, but eventually I started doing travel writing, because I enjoyed traveling. I've always enjoyed traveling since I was a kid. My mother always used to say that I had wheels in my feet. So ever since I was a kid, I've been traveling a lot. And fortunately, unfortunately, my grandfather was also a bit of an avid traveler, and he had taken me on my first international tour in the 90s. And that's what I was saying during my college days. I went, he was a coffee planter, and he also had a company which was in the coffee industry, and he wanted to take a group of directors, and he wanted to take his company team to study coffee practices overseas. And the first one of the first countries we went to was Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. Out of the blue, one day he just came and asked me whether I would be interested in coming with him. And I was still a teenager, about 18, 19 years old. I didn't even own a pair of jeans. Like I said, this was the time when we were still very much in the Android world. We didn't even know what mobile phones were. We didn't even know what internet was. We had not even heard these words. And my knowledge of Australia and New Zealand is only what I've read about, or what. So I obviously was very excited, and it was a 28-day trip, and I decided to go with him, and I learned a lot. And those days I saw people having mobile phones in airports, and I was like, what is this? And someone asked me, do you have an email? And I'm like, what's email? And we didn't understand any of these things at that time. And this was even when I was still graduating. And then when I came back to Chennai, and that's when I said, something had changed inside me. I really wanted to see the world after that. I had not even traveled, besides Bangalore, I had not even traveled outside Chennai, except maybe to our hometown villages in Tinaveli, Ooty, and Bangalore. And like I would have traveled to 5, 6 places, and I had already done my first international trip. And so then that's one of the reasons I wanted to study in Bombay, because I wanted to get out of that whole, you feel like you're a little frog in the well kind of a
Mm.
thing, and you want to just get out and see the world, see the places around you. And also, since we were in a slightly conservative society, we still had a cloistered existence. So even to go to streets or 3 streets away from our house, we had to get permission, and we can't take public transport and go, and we always had to be chaperoned and all of that. So somewhere all that was very limiting. And when I used to even work for a neighborhood newspaper, they used to make fun of me because I've never gotten into a public bus also. And I always that, and my school was opposite my house, my college was close by. So, somewhere in my mind, I felt like I had to see the world and I had to be prepared for it. Like if I had to be this cloistered existence, I will not even have I won't even have the guts to explore beyond the four walls, and also I definitely wanted to explore, see something new, see something different. And that was probably one reason why I decided to move out of Chennai and get to Bombay and get into the media, because that gives you a perspective that nowhere else you get. So I didn't think I would get into travel full time. I didn't even think that I always thought travel is going to be a part of my life. I always said it's a way of life. It's never a career, or I'm not a travel agent or a tour operator. I'm not yet, rather. And for me, it was travel was always about an experience that I get as a person, so when each time you travel, it just widens your perspective. So that is how my whole travel, I mean, that's how I felt about travel. So all these experiences, like I said, was in the back of my mind. So when I took a sabbatical, the first thing that I decided was to travel. So first I went on a holiday to Europe, and that was my first Europe trip, because I had been to Australia, New Zealand, I'd been to Singapore, Malaysia, I'd been to I'd also been to South America with my grandfather, those in the
Oh,
90s.
coffee connection.
Yeah, was part of the coffee connection. Yeah. So these were the two content. I mean, I'd already covered that the most remote places. So I wanted to see Europe. That was like my at that time more than America or Europe was a fixation. I come also from someone who's interested in history and social history and literature, and so UK and Europe was like my
Yeah,
so when I start.
I think from a travel standpoint, America is not high up in the list for anybody. I
Yeah, and I
mean,
and
maybe New
I and I
York.
don't. And I think even as a child, I didn't have this big American fantasy. Like a lot of people in my family wanted to go study in the America, and I somehow didn't have that fantasy, the American. So I was more always, I think, had this whole Europe as my, because I also was a literature student. So a lot of, poetry that we read or books that we read, everything had a Europe connection or a UK connection to it. And so this was a world that we grew up in, and, in our heads rather. So when I went to Europe for the first time, I chose countries obviously which was in my fantasy list, like Italy and Germany, but more on the Rhine and all of that, and Switzerland and Vienna. And so wanted to get that whole Europe feel. But one thing that it triggered in me is that I love the way Europeans market their history. Like if even the smallest stone is so rich in history, and they romanticize history. They give it so much importance. I mean, history is cool, Whereas when you come to India, we have so much of history, so much of ruins, so much of stories around it. But Indian history is never cool. We'd love to go to a beach, or we'd love to go to the forest, or we'd like to climb mountains. And I'm not saying that's not great, but then the history of India is amazing. I mean, every ruin says so much stories. And here I have to tell you a little bit here. So when I was in college, when I was studying in Bombay in Sophia's, in my mass comm, like I told you, we used to do we had photography as one of our subjects, and we used to have this old cameras, TPs and stuff like that. So we used to have a photography study tour, and they would take us to certain destinations once in a year to do these storytelling and, to take photographs through and tell storytelling through it. And we went to Badami, Aihole, Patadakal, Bijapur, and Hampi. Okay. And this I'm talking about in mid 90s.
Humvee
In the
wasn't this big back in those days, right? I think it
Nobody
got.
had even heard of him.
Yeah.
None of us, even we didn't hear, no one knew. And like again, I'm telling
Not
you,
even in
this
history books.
no, not even in history books. We in Vijayanagar Empire. See, first of all, history books never talks about South India. Okay, if you look at our history books in school, we have a chapter on. To my knowledge, I've had chapters on Ashoka. Then we go into Gupta and Chandragupta Maurya era, and then you go into the entire Delhi Sultanate, and then the Mughal era, and then the British freedom. There will be one Chotu paragraph on Vijayanagar and another
Rashtrakuta.
and two sentences on Chola Chera, that, but then maybe one four lines on Vijayanagar Empire. That's it. They never South India never existed in our history books. And the fourth and someone who studied history till 12th, I can tell you that and right. Okay. So the thing is, no one knew about Hampi. No one knew about Badami and Chalukyas and nothing. These were like a completely an unusual I mean, it was a different world altogether. And I had no clue of the geography either. Forget the history. I didn't even know that this was close to Bangalore. This was an overnight drive from Bangalore. This could be visited from Bombay. The connectivity, nothing. It was in Karnataka. Clueless about the whole geography part of it either. So when I came back to Bombay and I was doing my television era, and they told us to come up with content and come up with stories and come up with ideas, the first thing that I thought of is Hampi. Let's go cover Hampi. Let's go cover the Hampi festival. Even then, in I'm talking about 99, 2000, even then Hampi was like completely clueless for Bangaloreans or localites. I mean, the place was flooded with foreigners, mostly from Goa. And in fact, my story, it was narrated through the eyes of a Britisher this was a sixth or eighth visit at that time to Hampi. She knew more about Hampi than the guide we hired. And there was no locals from Bangalore in sight. I mean, there were obviously a lot of people, and it was catering to a very hippie kind of a crowd at that time, you know. And now, of course, Hampi is a different place altogether. But that was my point. That the reason that when I came back from Europe, I said, this, we have so much of gems in our country. And why are we not talking about these places? Why are we not exploring these places? Why are we not telling stories about these places? And why can't we romanticize them? Why do they have to be some dreary, dark, and dingy monument with wars fought and lost? And that is how I started traveling within India and started exploring, rural Karnataka, the Hoysala temples, the whole Hoysala era started, and then the Chalukya fascination, then Chola, Pandya, Vijay, all of these. I started getting more and more excited and interested in these places. I used to go to old Jaina caves. I used to go to very old temples. I used to go to ruins. I used to go to a lot of little places. And everything doesn't have to be an ancient history and full of, notes and dates and, facts. And it could be a lot of local flavor in it, people's stories in it, storytelling woven into it. And I know a lot of prudists and a lot of historians would scorn at it, but I'm a travel writer. I never claimed to be an historian, and I don't want to be one either. I want to tell the eyes of of an Indian lady traveling through these various realms and reliving the past through storytelling and that whole charm of these destinations. Of course, you bring in a historian's voice into it. Of course, you bring in the facts and figures into it. But this is not just a history class. You want to bring in the local flavor. You want to tell people stories through it as well.
Yeah, I went to college in middle of nowhere in Virginia, and one thing I noted was even the smallest of towns, they would just write, historic Blacksburg downtown or historic Pembroke downtown. When the history was just, I don't know, 1800s. We're talking about like 200, 300 years of history.
Yeah.
But every single town had, and when I landed for the first time, I was like, oh, I'm part of history, or I'm in a historic downtown. But then it turns out that they write it for every downtown.
True. I just came back from Virginia. I was in Alexandria and I was in
Jamestown.
Charlottesville and
Did
yeah,
you
I
go to
went to
Jamestown?
Charlottesville. No, no, I went to Charlottesville and we went to Alexandria and we saw, I think, did a tour of George Washington's house and Thomas Jefferson's. But I'm just saying the way school kids are taken around, the way they're so, excited about it. Of course, here also we do school excursions to places where nobody knows what is happening. They're just like randomly, just looking and running around. But at least I think the pride has to come in, we should feel proud. We shouldn't go and damage property. Kids go and scribble on on idols, and they just destroy. That's what we are taught, unfortunately, to
Yeah, I
go
mean,
and
I'm sure you might have noticed growing up in India and visiting these places. I used to think it's only in India, but it's everywhere, damaging
yeah,
architecture.
yeah, absolutely. We got
Yeah.
trying and putting out there that they were here first, or saying somebody loves somebody, or I was here. I don't know what is that thing, but I think in some countries now they punish if you destroy. Yeah, but like I said, I think the unfortunate thing is in India we are never taught to be proud of our architecture or art history, social history. Uh, we are just always kind of made to feel like it is no big deal, it's boring, and that I think is a
That was the end of part one of my conversation with Lakshmi Sharath. Stay tuned for part two. Till then, peace.